Hello, welcome to A Piece of Cake, Utah. I'm your host, Catherine O'Donnell, and today we're going to have a lot of fun learning how to transfer a pattern onto a cake. Now, if you're like me, my kids usually do not decide until the last minute what kind of a birthday cake they want to have. At the grocery store or different places like that, they're very limited to what they can do to your cakes, as in themes from Disney or different animated cartoons, things like that, things that they're allowed to do. So I'm going to teach you how to do it yourself so that you don't have to worry about what they can or can't do. My son just turned 5, and he decided about 2 or 3 days before his birthday he wanted to have an Iron Man birthday cake. So I thought, okay, we went online together to Google and looked at all the Iron Man cartoon pictures and just picked one out that he really, really liked. So I'm going to show you how we took that and put it on his birthday cake. The first thing you want to do is pick out a basic, simple design. You don't want to have anything that is too complicated, has too much detail, too many lines, anything like that. And even if it does, you can get around that, and I'll show you how to do that. So I've got my design here, and I'm going to first put it just lightly on my cake to make sure that it's going to fit. You don't want to get it all prepared and then find out it's not going to fit on your cake. So then I'm going to tape it down to some kind of a hard surface, like just a little cake board or something like that, just to hold it steady for you so you don't have it moving around while you're trying to copy the pattern. The next thing you're going to take is a piece of wax paper. You can also use parchment paper. Parchment paper works really well. The only reason why I prefer wax paper is you can see through it easier. And so especially if your design has a lot of lines or details or things like that, you can see through the wax paper easier. So then I'm going to take some tape and tape down my wax paper on top of my picture. And just depending on how the wax paper is laying down, you can tape it up more if you want. Okay, so one of the items you can use to help transfer this pattern onto your cake, one of the things is called piping gel. Now this piping gel here is clear, which is really good because then if you need to, you can color it with something, with your food paste colors, things like that. The only thing you want to be careful of is when you first open it, and even sometimes when it's been sitting around for a while after you've opened it, it's going to be really congealed like this. So you want to make sure that you stir it up really nice so that it's a lot more combined and not so stiff. So we're going to stir this up. There we go. So now you can see it's a lot less, or it's a lot more fluid. There we go. This jar is rather large, and it only takes a little bit of piping gel to do the whole pattern transfer. So another option is you can buy some of these really fun sparkle gels, or they have piping gel in even smaller tubes than that. Usually it's colored. I like this white sparkle gel because you're going to transfer or copy your pattern and then transfer it onto your cake, and I really don't want to have another color on there besides the colors of my icing that I'm going to be using. So the white one works out really well. And then it comes in its own tube. So if I was using this piping gel, I would have to put it in a bag with a tip and copy my whole pattern. But this way I can just use the tube of sparkle gel and not have to worry about getting a bag dirty or using the wrong tip or not having the tip clean or things like that. So we're going to use the sparkle gel today just to show you how great it can be. Okay, so we've got our white sparkle gel. So I'm just going to take this and put a thin line all around my pattern. It doesn't have to be very thick. It doesn't have to be very perfect either. You'll see here in a moment why. When we put it on our cake, the lines tend to get really thick and pushed out, distorted a little bit when you transfer it onto your cake. So you don't have to be too perfect with it. And two, if you have a pattern that has too many lines or too much detail, then you don't have to worry about getting all the lines in there, just enough so that you can tell what you're doing and see the pattern. So we're going to copy this all the way around. And some of these details I'm going to leave out because I can put them back in when I decorate it with my icing. My son was very specific, too, about what Iron Man we used. He really likes the animated series, and so he had to make sure that the picture came from the animated series and not any of the other Iron Man videos or things like that that they have out there. To me, I didn't see a difference, but to him there was. So it was nice to be able to do something like this that could fit what he wants. And then I also don't have to go out and buy a new pan. I have tons of pans shaped in all different characters and things like that. And of course, I don't have an Iron Man because most kids, their likes and dislikes change so quickly. It's hard to keep up with your pans. Okay, so we've got our basic outline here. So now I'm going to take the wax paper off of my board here. And I can see already a little space where I didn't get the piping gel on there. We'll put this back in there. There we go. And then we're going to transfer this onto our cake. So we'll bring our cake over here. Now, one important thing that you need to remember about this is when you're going to transfer this, we're going to be turning this over. And so if you had a pattern that had words or something specific on it, you need to make sure that you copied it backwards or reversed so that when you flip this over onto your cake, the words will be written the right way and not backwards. So we're going to take this, just lay it down on the cake here. And I also like the wax paper because I can see through it to my cake, so I can position this correctly. Then the next step, you can use your finger, or I like to use this little paintbrush here, but you're just going to lightly go back over this pattern, pushing it just gently onto the cake to make sure that the piping gel comes in contact with your cake so that it'll stick and you'll be able to see the pattern afterwards. I like to go from one side to the other just so I know that I can get the whole thing. I didn't miss any lines or anything. And you can kind of tell by looking at the piping gel through the wax paper whether it's contacting the cake or not. Okay. So we've done that. Now we're just going to take our wax paper and peel it back off of the cake here. And as you can see, there's still some piping gel left on the wax paper. Hold this up there. There we go. It's still left on the wax paper. So if I were doing this to several cakes, or if I had just a couple of things I wanted to put this on, you could reuse it a couple of times. Okay, and so on our cake here, we still have our pattern left over. So that is wonderful. Now we're going to take our icing bags and we're going to trace over those piping gel lines so you won't even be able to see them. And then we'll fill it in with our star tip. Now, a really cool trick, especially for a technique like this, I'm going to be using this round tip here many times with different colors. And so if you don't have a lot of round tips, you don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch to put on each single bag. You can put one round tip in one bag, and then you take your icing in another bag and just cut it open, and you just slip it down in there. And then I'll use this one, and then when I'm ready to use my yellow, I'll just take the red back out and slip my yellow bag in there. And you'll have to push out a little bit of icing that still is tinted red from being stuck here in the tip, but this method really works great. Okay, now if I were using a tip for the piping gel to copy the pattern, I would normally use a much larger tip, or not much larger, maybe one or two numbers larger than the one that I put on there, just to make sure that I cover everything. But again, I'm also safe because I used the white, and my cake is the icing is pretty much white, so you won't see it anyway. So now we're going to take our red icing here. You could use black, any color you want to use to do your final outline. Now when you do an outline, or when you do a pattern transfer like this, and you're going to have a star fill in for your pattern, you want to make sure that you always outline the pattern first and then fill it in, because it'll just end up looking kind of weird if you have the star fill in first and then you try to outline it afterwards. And there's a couple spots that I missed that the piping gel did not come in contact with the cake, and that's fine. I can pretty much tell where I need to go with this red icing, just because the pattern is so simple. If you're really trying to get technical with the pattern again, you can just make sure, you need to make sure that you come in contact with every piece of your piping gel to your icing. Almost done. One more leg here. My son also likes to watch me do the whole thing and critique. No, Mom, his shield is supposed to go there, or things like that. So when you get good at this technique, watch out. Your kids will start getting critical about where things go. Okay, so I've popped out my red here. We'll get my yellow one ready. I'll slide the yellow one in here. Squeeze a little bit out onto my napkin so I can make sure I get just yellow coming out. There we go. Clean off the red from the tip, and then we'll come back in here and get some of these lines with our yellow. Okay. There we go. Okay, now we're going to switch tips and go to our star tip that we're going to fill in this pattern with. You can use any star tip to fill in the pattern with. It's really simple, but if you have a smaller pattern like this one, you want to use a smaller star tip. If you have a much larger area to cover, then you'll use a much larger star tip. And one more thing before I fill in with my stars, another thing you can use your paintbrush for is you'll have little areas where you've stopped or started with your icing, and so you can go back over that with your paintbrush and just kind of smooth it all out so that you don't have any peaks or little areas. Maybe there's a part that didn't completely connect, and so you can just go back over that with your brush. If you're working with buttercream icing like this, you'll want to use kind of a wet brush. If you're working with royal icing or something that dries really hard, you want to use a dry brush, because the wetness from the brush will cause the royal icing to start melting. Okay, so we're just going to take this is a tip 18. I'm just going to fill that in. And there's two ways you can do this. You can do all the little features first and then fill it in around it. Or sometimes I like to do my stars first and then put in my features afterwards, like the eyes and the nose and the mouth and things like that. Okay, not very many fill-ins for our yellow. So we'll switch back to our red now, and we'll fill in with our red. There is another tip that you can use for star fill-ins, and that is this really large tip. It's called tip 2010 from Wilton, and it's a triple star tip. It has 3 stars here on the top, if you can see this. It's a really fun tip to fill in everything really fast. The only thing is, since there's 3 on here, if I have a small area, those 3 get rather large and it will cause it to go over my borders. And so I want to make sure that I use the right size tip for the design and the pattern that I'm working on. Okay, so we'll take our red star here and just start filling this in. When you're doing a star fill-in border, you usually want to start right next to the border of the pattern, and then you can go back and fill in the inside parts next. If you don't start right next to the border, then it tends to look kind of sloppy and like you have gaps, things like that. So that's how to avoid gaps when you're doing your star fill-in border. So I'm just going to go all the way around here, right next to the border. Now with your star technique, this is a really simple technique. You want to make sure that you squeeze your icing out, and then before you pull your tip away from the icing, you want to release your pressure. If you pull it away before you've released your pressure, then you're going to get a really long star, really tall star, there we go. And you know, that may be the technique that you're looking for. Say if you're doing a bear cake or something like that and you want them to look kind of shaggy or furry or something, then you'll want elongated stars. But for something like this, where I don't want the stars to stand up too high, I'm going to make sure that I release my pressure before I pull my bag away. And sometimes when you get going really fast, you start having elongated stars anyway, and that's okay because this icing will dry and crust over a little bit, and then you can go back and kind of tap down those little elongated stars so that they look more even and natural with all the other stars. And then you don't even have to worry about it. And if people are looking so closely at your stars or decorations on your cake like that, and if they start critiquing things like that, then you can push their face just a little bit farther into that cake. And that's what they get for critiquing your cake and your decorating skills. Okay, so we are almost done here. Just filling this in. Another reason why I like to put my stars next to my border first and then fill in the rest, if my border has shifted or if the icing didn't lay down exactly where I wanted it to, I can use this star tip to help shift that border around to be exactly where I want it to be. And so if one side has gone too far, I can shift it over with the pressure of putting another star next to it. And the same if it went too thin, if it didn't go out far enough, then I can just make it go out farther with my star tip. So just a couple more stars here, and we will be done. Okay, so there you go. You have a really cool pattern transfer decorated cake of Iron Man, and you didn't even have to go to the store. It looks really professional, like you did it yourself, hand drew it yourself, and nobody will know the difference. The other key thing that you want to remember about this technique is you want to do your borders last. You're always going to do your design first and your borders last. Usually, I teach a lot of classes, and usually I tell my students that I prefer to do all of my writing first. I write on my cake first, and then I put my design and everything on there just to make sure I have enough room for my writing. But with this technique, you would do your pattern first, and then you would write on it last, just to make sure that you didn't mess up the writing, or the writing that's already on there. Okay, so this last thing we're going to do is our borders. I'm getting a tip 21 in here. And then the other thing I'm doing is I'm slipping both of my bags into here because I want to have a really cool pattern of red and yellow for my border. Wilton sells bags like this that are already divided inside, and so you can put your 2 different colors inside of there. I just fill 2 bags because I already had 2 bags ready to go from doing the pattern transfer on top. So whatever you want to do, you can totally do that. I'm just going to do a simple shell here on the bottom. And I like using the 2 bags rather than trying to just put 2 things of icing in my bag, just filling in regular icing, because this helps keep my striped icing here more uniform. And I also won't run out as easily. So we're just doing a simple shell border. Some of the tips for your borders are that you always want to have a larger border on the bottom and a smaller border on the top. Just, I guess, aesthetically it looks better that way. So if I use a tip 21 here on the bottom, I'm probably going to switch to like a tip 18 or something for the top. You can keep the same tip number for the top as well. That would be completely fine. But you just want to make sure that it doesn't get bigger. So I wouldn't want to use a tip 21 on the top and then a tip 18 on the bottom or anything like that. That would just put it out of proportion. And our last side here. The shell border is a really fun border, a really simple border that makes your cakes look really good. And you can use the same method, the same technique that you use for the shell border for a round border, for things like that. Yeah, just anything. And now the top here, I'm actually going to do a reverse shell. Kind of makes it look like a little question mark. It's a really fun border too. The only problem is you have to remember which way you're going so that you can get the right one going here. It also helps to cover up your unsightly, not perfect corners and things like that. Now right here, I did not remember, and those 2 are the same direction, but you know what? It's okay. This border is just going everywhere, and so it's not that easy to spot. And hey, it's your border. It can be anything you want. So we are almost done here. One more side, and we'll have this done. Another fun tip and trick about your borders is sometimes if your cake is a little bit short or shorter than you'd like it to be, then you can take your borders, and if you put your border on top of the cake rather than on the sides, it makes it look taller. And that way too, if your cake looks a little bit too tall, you can put your border on the side of the cake rather than on the top here, and it kind of shortens it for you. So that is our first little technique and trick here. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it made you feel like, oh, I want to go out there and try this myself. After this break, we're going to show you another way to get the same kind of technique onto your cake.